The wheels of my suitcase squeaked against the linoleum floor as I was wheeled into Willow Creek Nursing Home, the sound echoing like a clock ticking down the days I had left. At 78, I'd lived through enough to know life wasn't fair. But this felt like a betrayal carved into my bones. My children, Sarah and Michael, stood at the reception desk, signing papers with practiced efficiency, their faces tight with something that wasn't quite guilt but close enough to sting. They decided, without asking, that I couldn't manage alone anymore. My home, the one I'd built with their father over 40 years, was deemed unsafe for a woman with a bad hip and a heart that sometimes fluttered like a trapped bird. "You'll love it here, Mom," Sarah said, her voice bright but brittle, like she was selling me a timeshare instead of signing away my independence. Michael nodded, avoiding my eyes, his hands stuffed deep in his pockets. I wanted to scream, to tell them I wasn't ready to be shelved like an old book, but my throat tightened, and all I could manage was a nod. They hugged me quick, perfunctory embraces, and promised to visit soon. Then they were gone, their footsteps fading down the hall, leaving me with the sterile smell of antiseptic and the weight of my new reality. The room they gave me was small, with a single window overlooking a parking lot. The walls were beige, the kind of color that screams, "Don't make a fuss." A nurse named Clara, young and kind but overworked, helped me unpack. She chatted about the activity schedule bingo on Tuesdays, movie nights on Fridays like it was a summer camp. I smiled politely, but inside, I was cataloging every detail of this place, every crack in the system. I'd spent my life as a bookkeeper, balancing ledgers, finding errors in the chaos of numbers. Willow Creek was just another ledger, and I'd already spotted its flaws. That first night, I lay in the narrow bed, the mattress creaking under my weight. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional cough or shuffle from neighboring rooms. I thought of my house, the creak of the porch swing, the way the light filtered through the kitchen curtains at dawn. I thought of my husband, David, gone 5 years now, and how we'd raised our kids in that home, teaching them to ride bikes in the driveway, bandaging their scraped knees. How had it come to this? How had my children, the ones I'd poured my life into, decided I was better off here, tucked away like a problem they didn't have time to solve? By morning, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to fade into the background of this place. I'd spent decades building a life, and I wasn't about to let it end in a room that smelled of bleach and regret. I started small, observing the routines, the staff, the residents. There was Margaret, 82, who knitted scarves she never wore, her fingers trembling but determined. There was George, a gruff 85-year-old veteran who hid his loneliness behind stories of the war. And there was Ruth, 90, who whispered about her days as a dancer, her eyes lighting up when she spoke of the stage. They were all like me, people with lives, stories, dreams, reduced to schedules and pill cups. The staff, though kind in their way, were stretched thin. Meals were served late, medications sometimes forgotten. The director, Mr. Hargrove, was a man who loved his clipboard more than his residents, always talking about efficiency while the paint peeled and the garden wilted. I watched him, noting how he dismissed complaints, how he cut corners to save a dime. Willow Creek wasn't a home. It was a business, and a poorly run one at that. I began to ask questions. Polite ones. At first, why were the meals so bland? Why was the heat turned down so low in the common room? The answers were vague, brushed off with smiles or excuses about budgets. But I wasn't just Eleanor Mason, the new resident in room 14. I was Eleanor Mason, who'd balanced the books for a small factory through 2 recessions, who'd caught embezzlers by spotting a single misplaced decimal, I started keeping a notebook, jotting down every inefficiency, every overlooked detail. The more I learned, the clearer it became. Willow Creek wasn't just neglectful, it was vulnerable. One afternoon, while sipping watery coffee in the dining hall, I overheard two aides talking about the facility's financial troubles. Hargrove's in over his head. One whispered, "The owners are looking to sell if they can find a buyer." My heart skipped, not in fear, but in possibility. I'd saved carefully over the years, living frugally after David's passing. My house was paid off. My investments modest but steady. I'd always planned to leave something for Sarah and Michael, but they'd made their choice. Now, I had a new plan. I called my old friend, Tom, a lawyer who'd handled David's estate. Over the phone, I laid out my idea, expecting him to laugh. Instead, he was quiet for a moment, then said, "Ellie, you're crazy, but it just might work." He agreed to look into Willow Creek's ownership. Discreetly. Days turned into weeks as I waited, keeping up appearances, playing bingo, joining the knitting circle, all while my mind churned with numbers and possibilities. Tom called back with news. The facility was indeed for sale, listed quietly to avoid spooking the staff or residents. The price was steep but within reach if I liquidated my savings and took out a loan against my house. The thought of spending everything I had was terrifying, but the alternative, living out my days in a place that saw me as a burden, was worse. I told Tom to make an offer, anonymously. I didn't want Hargrove or anyone else knowing it was me. Not yet. The negotiations were slow, agonizing, but I had time. I spent my days building alliances with the residents, listening to their stories, their complaints. They trusted me, and I began to see them not just as neighbors, but as partners in what was to come. When the sale went through, I felt a rush I hadn't known since my youth. Willow Creek was mine, not just a room, but the whole damn place. I owned the peeling paint, the creaky floors, the garden that hadn't bloomed in years. And with that ownership came power. I wasn't ready to reveal myself. Not yet. I needed a plan. One that would shake this place to its core and remind every Onami children included that Eleanor Mason was far from finished. The first step was to keep my ownership a secret. If Hargrove or the staff knew, they'd either panic or try to undermine me before I could act. I instructed Tom to handle all communications through a holding company, a faceless entity that wouldn't trace back to the quiet old lady in room 14. Meanwhile, I played my part, smiling at bingo, nodding through Hargrove's patronizing speeches about community spirit. But every night, in the dim glow of my bedside lamp, I pored over my notebook, sketching out changes. Better food, more staff, a garden that actually grew flowers, and, most importantly, a way to make my children understand the weight of their decision. I started with the residents. They were the heart of Willow Creek, not the balance sheets Hargrove obsessed over. I spent hours in the common room, listening to their stories, their fears. Margaret told me about her daughter, who visited once a year, always rushing off with excuses. George shared how he missed his old workshop, where he'd fixed radios for neighbors. Ruth dreamed of dancing again, even if just in her mind. Their words fueled me, not just with anger at how they'd been sidelined, but with a vision of what this place could be: a home, not a warehouse for the elderly. My first move as owner was to fire Hargrove. Not directly. Of course, I wasn't ready to step into the light. Through Tom, I sent a letter to the board, now just a formality. Since I was the board, citing mismanagement and resident neglect. Hargrove was gone within a week, replaced by a temporary manager, Ms. Linda Carter, a no-nonsense woman Tom recommended. Linda didn't know I was the owner either, but she was open to suggestions from the mysterious new management. I funneled ideas through anonymous emails. Hire more nurses. Fix the heating. Bring in a chef who knew how to season food. Slowly, Willow Creek began to change. The dining hall smelled of fresh herbs instead of boiled cabbage. The common room got new armchairs. Soft and sturdy. Residents noticed. Their eyes brighter. Their voices louder. But I wasn't done. My children needed to see what they'd done. Not just to me, but to everyone here. Sarah and Michael had visited twice since I'd arrived, each time for less than an hour. Their conversations clipped and distracted. They'd talk about their jobs, their kids, their busy lives, never asking about mine. I'd raised them to be independent, but somewhere along the way, they'd forgotten I was more than their mother. I was a person. So, I changed the visiting hours. Through Tom, I had Linda implement a new policy. Family visits were now by appointment only, with a strict limit of 1 hour per month unless residents approved otherwise. The change caused a stir. Families complained, but Linda held firm, citing resident well-being and resource allocation. I watched Sarah and Michael's faces when they were told their next visit would be in 3 weeks. At 10 a.m. sharp. For 1 hour. Sarah's brow furrowed, her phone already out to check her calendar. Michael muttered something about fairness. I sat quietly, my hands folded, hiding the satisfaction curling in my chest. The residents, though, loved it. For the first time, they had control. Margaret made her daughter book a slot 2 months out, saying, if she can't make time, neither can I. George used his hour to teach his grandson about radios, savoring every minute. Ruth turned away her nephew, who only came to ask for money, and spent her hour teaching a nurse to waltz. I saw their pride, their reclaimed dignity, and it strengthened my resolve. But owning Willow Creek wasn't enough. I wanted it to thrive, to be a place where people like us weren't just stored but celebrated. I started meeting with Linda in secret, posing as a resident advocate. I suggested programs, art classes, a book club, a weekly music night where Ruth could share her old records. I pushed for a garden overhaul, hiring a landscaper to plant roses and lavender, things that reminded us of life outside these walls. The budget was tight, my savings were nearly drained, but I found ways to stretch every dollar, just like I had in my bookkeeping days. The residents became my allies, even if they didn't know the full story. I organized a resident council, letting them vote on changes. They chose brighter paint for the halls, better lighting, even a new coffee machine. They didn't know I was funding it, but their smiles were payment enough. I began to feel like Eleanor again, not the frail widow my children saw, but the woman who'd once run a household, a career, a life. Still, I knew the real test was coming. Sarah and Michael's next visit was approaching, and I'd planned something special not just for them, but for me. I wanted them to see Willow Creek not as the prison they'd chosen for me, but as the empire I'd built from their abandonment. I wanted them to see me. The day of Sarah and Michael's visit arrived. A crisp morning with sunlight streaming through the newly cleaned windows of Willow Creek. The facility had changed in the months since I'd taken over. The halls were painted a soft cream, with framed photos of residents' younger days, Ruth on a stage, George in his army uniform, Margaret with her children. The garden bloomed with color, roses climbing trellises, and the dining hall buzzed with laughter over meals that actually tasted like home. I'd poured every ounce of my energy into this place, and it showed. But today wasn't about Willow Creek's transformation, it was about mine. I dressed carefully, choosing a navy cardigan and a silver brooch David had given me on our 20th anniversary. My hands trembled as I pinned it on, not from age, but from anticipation. I'd arranged for Sarah and Michael to meet me in the new community room, a space I'd insisted on renovating with cozy furniture and bookshelves. The council had named it Eleanor's Corner after I'd suggested the idea, though they still didn't know I was the owner. I wanted my children to see it, to feel the life I'd created here. When they arrived, they looked out of place, like tourists in a foreign land. Sarah wore her usual business suit, her heels clicking impatiently. Michael carried a box of chocolates, the same generic brand he brought every time. They glanced around, clearly surprised by the changes: the fresh flowers, the warm lighting, the residents chatting happily over coffee. "This place looks different," Sarah said, her tone cautious, like she was waiting for a catch. I smiled, guiding them to a table. "It's home now," I said simply, watching their faces for a flicker of guilt. There was none. Not yet. We sat, and they launched into their usual update: Sarah's promotion, Michael's new car, their kids' soccer games. I listened, nodding, but my mind was elsewhere, plotting the moment I'd reveal the truth. After 20 minutes, I interrupted. "I have something to show you," I said, standing. They followed, puzzled, as I led them through the halls, pointing out the new art studio, the garden, the library. I spoke with pride about the resident council, the music nights, the way we'd turned this place into a community. Sarah raised an eyebrow, and Michael asked, "How do you afford all this?" I just smiled and said, "We found a way." The tour ended in my office, not room 14, but a small space I'd claimed as the resident advocate. It had a desk, a window overlooking the garden, and a single chair for visitors. I sat behind the desk, gesturing for them to stand. "There's something you need to know," I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. "I own Willow Creek. I bought it. Every wall, every chair, every rose in that garden, it's mine." Their faces froze, Sarah's mouth half open, Michael's eyes wide. For the first time in years, I had their full attention. I explained everything: how I'd used my savings, how I'd worked through Tom to stay anonymous, how I'd turned this place around. I told them about the visiting hours, how I'd given residents control over their time, their dignity. "You put me here," I said, my voice cracking but firm. "You decided I was done living. But I'm not. And neither are the people here." Sarah stammered, "Mom, we thought this was best for you." Michael nodded, his face pale. "We didn't want you to get hurt," he said, but the words sounded hollow, like an excuse they'd rehearsed too many times. "Best for me," I repeated, leaning forward. "Or best for you?" The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. I didn't wait for an answer. I handed them a new visiting schedule, printed on crisp paper. "From now on, you'll visit when I say, not when it's convenient for you. 1 hour a month, unless I decide otherwise. That's the rule here now." They stared at the paper, then at me, as if seeing me for the first time. I saw the hurt in their eyes, but also something else: respect, maybe, or fear. I didn't care which. I'd spent too long being invisible to them, and now I was undeniable. After they left, I sat in my office, the silence settling around me. I felt lighter, like I'd shed a weight I'd carried for years. But the work wasn't done. Willow Creek was thriving, but it needed more staff, more programs, more life. And I needed to decide what came next for me, for my children, for this unexpected legacy I was building. The weeks following my confrontation with Sarah and Michael were a whirlwind. Word spread among the residents about the new management, though I still kept my ownership under wraps. The changes at Willow Creek were undeniable: fresh paint, better food, a schedule packed with activities, and the residents thrived in ways I hadn't expected. Margaret started teaching a knitting class. her hand steadier with purpose. George fixed an old radio in the lounge, his gruff voice softening as he showed a nurse how it worked. Ruth led a dance workshop, her wheelchair no barrier to her grace. I watched them, my heart swelling with pride, but also with a nagging question: what was I building this for? I spent my days juggling my dual roles, resident and secret owner. Through Tom, I hired more staff, including a young chef who trained in New Orleans and a physical therapist who specialized in mobility for seniors. I pushed for a memory care program, inspired by Ruth's occasional lapses, and a mentorship program where residents could share their skills with local students. Every decision was a step toward making Willow Creek a place where people didn't just survive, but lived. But my children haunted my thoughts. Their shocked faces lingered, as did their weak excuses. I wanted to believe they'd meant well, that they'd been scared for me, not just tired of me. Yet their absence in the weeks that followed spoke louder than their words. They hadn't called to argue, to apologize, or even to ask for their next visit. It hurt, but it also freed me. I'd spent too long defining myself through the Eleanor, the mother, the widow, the burden. Now, I was Eleanor, the architect of something new. One evening, as I sat in the garden watching the sunset paint the roses gold, Margaret joined me. She'd knitted me a scarf, blue like the sky, and draped it over my shoulders. "You've done something here, Ellie," she said, her voice soft but sure. "This place feels like home now." I squeezed her hand, unable to speak. Her words were a reminder that Willow Creek wasn't just my rebellion, it was a sanctuary for all of us. I began to think about legacy. Not the money I'd once planned to leave Sarah and Michael, but something bigger. What if Willow Creek could be a model? A place where the elderly weren't discarded but empowered. I started researching, with Tom's help, reaching out to other facilities, sharing our policies anonymously. Of course, the visiting hours rule, in particular, caught attention. A nearby nursing home adopted it, and I heard stories of families suddenly prioritizing their loved ones, forced to respect their time. But there was still the matter of my children. I didn't want revenge that was too small, too petty. I wanted understanding. So, I invited them back, scheduling their next visit for a special event, Willow Creek's first Family Day, a celebration I'd planned with the resident council. It would be a chance for families to see the new Willow Creek, to participate in workshops, share meals, and listen to residents' stories. I wanted Sarah and Michael to see what I'd built, not just to shame them, but to show them what was possible when you stopped seeing age as a limitation. The day approached, and I felt a mix of nerves and determination. I wore my brooch again, a talisman of the life I'd lived before this, and stood at the entrance as families arrived. The garden was alive with laughter, children running through the flower beds, residents showing off their art or telling stories. Ruth led a dance performance, her wheelchair spinning gracefully to a jazz record. George demonstrated his radio repair, his grandson at his side. Margaret handed out scarves she'd knitted for every visitor. When Sarah and Michael arrived, they looked hesitant, clutching their usual chocolates. I greeted them warmly, but not as their Mothier as Willow Creek's host. I introduced them to residents, let them see the changes, the life pulsing through this place. They listened, quiet, as Ruth told her story, as George laughed with his grandson. I saw Sarah's eyes soften, Michael's shoulders relax. They were seeing me, maybe for the first time in years, not as a problem, but as a force. Family Day was a triumph, but it left me restless. The sight of Sarah and Michael mingling with residents, their faces softening as they listened to stories, stirred something in me, hope, maybe, but also a deep ache. They'd seen Willow Creek's transformation, but had they seen mine? I wanted them to understand. Not just the work I'd done, but the why behind it. I'd spent months building this place, pouring my heart into it. But the rift with my children remained a wound that wouldn't heal. That night, after the last guest left and the garden fell quiet, I sat in my office. The scarf Margaret made me draped over my chair. I wrote a letter to Sarah and Michael, not as the owner of Willow Creek, but as their mother. I poured out everything, the hurt of being left here, the fear of losing myself, the fire that drove me to buy this place. I told them about the residents, how their stories had become my purpose, how I'd found a new kind of family here. I didn't ask for apologies. I asked for time. Come back, I wrote. Not because you have to, but because you want to know me again. I mailed the letter through Tom, keeping my anonymity intact for now. I didn't know if they'd respond, but writing it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Meanwhile, Willow Creek continued to evolve. The mentorship program took off, with local high schoolers visiting weekly to learn from residents. George taught woodworking. Ruth shared dance history, and I even led a session on budgeting, dusting off my old bookkeeping skills. The students brought energy, and the residents gave them wisdom. It was a bridge between generations, one I wished I'd had with my own children. Linda, the manager, started to suspect I was more than a resident advocate. She'd catch me in my office, scribbling notes, and ask pointed questions about the new owners. I deflected with smiles, but I knew I couldn't hide forever. The truth was, I wasn't sure I wanted to. Owning Willow Creek had given me power, but it was also a burden. The finances were tight, and I'd stretched my resources to the limit. I began to wonder if I should step forward, not just for the residents, but for myself. One afternoon, as I helped Ruth organize her records for music night, she looked at me with those sharp, knowing eyes. "Eleanor, you're not just a volunteer, are you?" she asked. I froze, then laughed, trying to brush it off. But Ruth wasn't fooled. "Whoever's behind this place, they've got your heart," she said. Her words stayed with me, a reminder that my secret wasn't just about control, it was about fear. Fear of being seen, of being vulnerable again. I decided it was time to reveal myself, but not in a grand announcement. I started small, telling Margaret and George during a council meeting. Their jaws dropped. Then they laughed, Margaret clapping her hands like a child. "You sly old fox," George said, his eyes twinkling. They promised to keep my secret, but their pride in me gave me courage. I began to plan a bigger reveal, one that would include the staff and residents, a way to solidify Willow Creek's future. Sarah and Michael's response came a week later, a single letter addressed to me at Willow Creek. They wanted to visit, not for an hour, but for a day. They wrote about Family Day, how it had opened their eyes, how they wanted to understand my world. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was a start. I scheduled their visit for the day I'd reveal my ownership, a moment when I'd bridge the gap between the mother they'd left and the woman I'd become. The reveal was set for a resident council meeting, one I'd planned with Linda's help, though she still didn't know the full truth. I felt the weight of it all the years. The betrayal, the triumph as I prepared to step into the open, ready to claim not just Willow Creek, but my place in the world. The day of the reveal arrived, and Willow Creek buzzed with anticipation. I told the resident council we were announcing big news, and they'd spread the word, filling the community room with residents, staff, and a few curious family members. Sarah and Michael were there, seated near the front, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. I'd invited them for the day, promising a chance to see my world, but they had no idea what was coming. I stood at the front of the room, my hands steady despite the racing of my heart. I wore my navy cardigan, the the silver brooch gleaming under the lights. Linda introduced me as the resident advocate, her voice warm but professional. I took a deep breath, looking out at the faces I'd come to know, Margaret's encouraging nod, George's sly grin, Ruth's bright eyes. These were my people, my purpose. I've been keeping a secret, I began, my voice clear and strong. Willow Creek isn't just my home. It's mine legally. Fully. Mine. I bought it. Every brick and flower. Because I believed it could be more than a place to wait out our days. I believed we deserved better. The room erupted in gasps. Then murmurs. Then applause. Margaret hooped. And George slapped his knee, laughing. Linda's jaw dropped, her clipboard forgotten. Sarah and Michael stared, their eyes wide, as if seeing a stranger. I went on, explaining how I'd used my savings, how I'd worked in secret to transform this place. I talked about the residents, their stories, their strength, and how they'd inspired me to fight for a home that honored them. This isn't just about me, I said, gesturing to the crowd. It's about all of us, Margaret, who knits hope into every scarf. George, who fixes more than radios. Ruth, who dances in her heart every day. We're not done living, and this place is proof of that. I turned to Sarah and Michael, my voice softening but firm. You brought me here, thinking I was finished. But I wasn't. I'm still your mother. But I'm also more. I'm the woman who built this. Their faces were unreadable shock. Guilt. Maybe pride, but I didn't linger on them. This moment was for everyone. The applause grew louder, and I felt a weight lift. I wasn't hiding anymore. Linda approached, shaking her head in disbelief, then hugged me. You're incredible, Eleanor, she whispered. The residents swarmed me, their hands patting my shoulders, their voices a chorus of gratitude. I saw tears in Ruth's eyes, a rare vulnerability, and it broke something open in me. After the meeting, Sarah and Michael stayed. We sat in the garden, the roses fragrant around us, and talked not as mother and children, but as equals. They admitted they'd been wrong, not just about Willow Creek, but about me. We thought we were protecting you, Sarah said, her voice thick. But we didn't see you. Michael nodded, his hands fidgeting. We want to be part of this, Mom, if you'll let us. I didn't forgive them. Not yet. Trust is rebuilt slowly, like a house after a storm. But I gave them a chance, scheduling regular visits, not 1 hour, but days, to help with the garden, to join music nights, to learn from the residents. They agreed, their eyes earnest, and I felt the first stirrings of hope. Willow Creek's future was my next challenge. The finances were still precarious, but I had ideas, grants, partnerships, maybe even a documentary about our transformation. I wasn't alone anymore. The residents, the staff, even my children were part of this now. I'd turned a prison into a home, and in doing so, I'd found myself again. With my ownership out in the open, Willow Creek felt different, lighter, like a house after a good spring cleaning. The residents treated me like a quiet hero, slipping me extra desserts or squeezing my hand in the halls. The staff, led by Linda, worked with a new energy, knowing their mysterious benefactor was one of us. But I wasn't resting on my laurels. Running Willow Creek was a daily battle against budgets, regulations, and the creeping doubt that I'd bitten off more than I could chew. I threw myself into securing the facility's future. Tom helped me apply for grants, targeting foundations that supported elder care innovation. I pitched Willow Creek as a model proof that nursing homes could be vibrant, resident-driven communities. We won a small grant from a local charity, enough to fund the mentorship program for another year and hire an activities coordinator. I also reached out to a filmmaker, a young woman who'd visited during Family Day, about documenting our story. She was intrigued, and we began planning a short film, something to share our vision with the world. Sarah and Michael started visiting regularly, not just for me, but for Willow Creek. Sarah, with her business acumen, offered to review our budgets, her eyes widening at how I'd stretched my savings. Michael, handy with tools, helped George build a small workshop in the basement, where residents could tinker with radios or woodworking projects. Their involvement wasn't perfect. There were still awkward silences, moments when old hurts surfaced, but it was progress. I saw glimpses of the children I'd raised, the ones who'd once run to me with their dreams and fears. The residents continued to amaze me. Margaret's knitting class grew, with students from the mentorship program joining in, their young hands clumsy but eager. Ruth's dance workshops became a weekly highlight, with residents and staff swaying to her old jazz records. George's workshop produced a radio that picked up a local station, and we celebrated with a listening party in the lounge. These weren't just activities. They were lifelines, proof that age didn't erase purpose. But there were challenges. A pipe burst in the West Wing, draining our emergency fund. A new state regulation required costly upgrades to our fire system. I lay awake at night, my old bookkeeping instincts kicking in, searching for solutions. I considered selling my house, the one Sarah and Michael had deemed unsafe, to cover the costs. It hurt to think of letting it go, but Willow Creek was my home now, and I'd do whatever it took to protect it. One evening, as I sat with Ruth in the garden, she asked about my children. I told her about their visits, the slow rebuilding of our bond. She nodded, her eyes distant. Families like dancing, she said. You step on each other's toes, but you keep moving. Her wisdom, sharp and simple, reminded me why I'd fought for this place. It wasn't just about might, it was about giving people like Ruth a stage to shine. I began to dream bigger. What if Willow Creek could inspire other facilities? What if we could train staff, share our policies, create a network of homes where the elderly were seen, heard, celebrated? I started drafting a proposal, working late into the night, my desk littered with coffee cups and notes. It was exhausting, exhilarating, and I felt more alive than I had in years. Sarah and Michael's next visit was a turning point. They arrived with their family me grandchildren, who ran through the garden, laughing as George showed them his radio. We shared a meal, the dining hall loud with chatter, and for the first time, I felt like their mother again, not a burden. They didn't know it, but they were part of my legacy now, part of Willow Creek's story. A year after I'd bought Willow Creek, it was unrecognizable from the sterile place I'd been wheeled into. The garden bloomed year-round, thanks to a volunteer team of residents and local students. The dining hall served meals that rivaled restaurants, and the community room Eleanor's Corner was always full, whether for book club, music night, or just coffee and conversation. The filmmaker's documentary was in progress, capturing the residents' stories, their laughter, their resilience. We'd even won a second grant, enough to upgrade the fire system and hire another nurse. But the real change was in the people. Margaret, George, Ruth, and the others weren't just residents, they were family, bound by shared purpose. They'd taught me as much as I'd given them, showing me that life doesn't end at 78, or 88, or 98. They'd given me back my fire, my reason to wake up each morning. My relationship with Sarah and Michael had grown, too. They visited weekly, bringing their families, their time, their skills. Sarah helped secure a corporate sponsor for the mentorship program, and Michael built a small stage for Ruth's dance performances. They'd apologized, Not with grand gestures, but with quiet moments helping in the garden, listening to my stories, seeing me. I forgave them, not because they deserved it, but because I wanted to move forward, not back. The visiting hours policy remained, a symbol of the residents' power. It had spread to other facilities, sparking conversations about dignity and respect in elder care. I was invited to speak at a conference, sharing Willow Creek's story anonymously at first, but now as Eleanor Mason, owner and advocate. I stood on that stage, my brooch pinned proudly, and told the world what we'd done. The applause was deafening, but it was the residents' faces in my mind that mattered most. Financially, Willow Creek was stable but not secure. I'd sold my house, pouring the money into repairs and programs. It was a sacrifice, but it felt right. My home was here, in the laughter of the dining hall, the scent of roses, the warmth of Margaret's scarves. I was working on a sustainable model, partnering with local businesses and universities, ensuring Willow Creek could thrive long after I was gone. One evening, as I sat in the garden with Ruth, watching the stars emerge, she took my hand. "You've given us a home, Ellie," she said. "Not just a place, but a life." I squeezed her hand, tears in my eyes. I'd come here expecting to fade, but instead, I'd built something lasting. Willow Creek wasn't just a nursing home, it was a testament to what happens when you refuse to be forgotten. As I looked out at the garden, the lights of the community room glowing behind us, I thought of my children, my husband, my life before this. I'd lost so much, but I'd gained more. I'd taken their decision, their betrayal, and turned it into a legacy. And in doing so, I'd changed their visiting hours. And mine. Forever.